Hello, everyone. Thank you for registering for the ManageEngine webinar and most importantly, taking time off your schedule and joining me for today's session. My name is Megha and I'm a product marketer at ManageEngine. Before I begin with the session, let me just cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the session, please feel free to make use of the Q&A or the chat option on your Zoom panel. If you do face any technical difficulties, as in if you're not able to hear me, if you're not able to see my screen, please do let me know as well. And you will also receive the recording of today's session to your registered email address. And I will also leave my email address at the end, so you can email me if you have any questions about the session, about the product that I'll be talking about in brief at the end of the session. Okay. So the topic is identifying red flags within our system that indicates that as an organization, you may be vulnerable to insider threats. And these are some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing, more or less like identifying some of the pitfalls and then also giving you some workarounds to combat these and also prevent any insider attacks within your organization. So security threats from external sources should be a constant concern and is a constant concern for any organization. But most organizations don't even realize or do not understand the magnitude of a threat, which is like one of the most damaging security threat that is coming from within the organization. So the larger an organization, the higher the risk because of the sheer number of entry points that are linked to the data, the users, and so on. And also, we do not take into account of the number of users who may potentially have legitimate access to your network. So it's time for the IT industry or the IT security teams to step up your security game by identifying the common pitfalls in managing your IT infrastructure and also taking relevant measures to plug those security gaps. So first up, let's see the difference between an insider threat and an external threat. Now, unlike external hackers, the insiders do not need to infiltrate the perimeter defenses like your firewalls and intrusion prevention systems. The insider threat can be anyone who has or someone who has had access to the systems like your full-time employees, your contractors, partners, and even the ex-employees, as in the employees who left the organization, but all those accounts are still lying active. So the damage can be caused by accidental access. That could be one. If someone happened to come across some information that they probably should not have access to. Second, it could be a negligence where an insider failed to adhere to policies. Or the third category can be the malicious intent with which somebody actively sets out to steal your data and bring down systems. So I have some interesting results from this study by the Cybersecurity Insiders, the 2020 Insider Threat Report, where most of the organizations, around 52% of the organizations, find it difficult to detect and prevent insider threats, and it's subsequently more than being aware of external threats. So who are these people whose behavior exposes us to data loss and brand damage? So it typically boils down to three basic descriptions. Current employees. So the first category are just negligent employees. That could be your current employees, your contractors, business partners who either fall for phishing scams and then become pawns for external hackers, or these users could inadvertently misuse or expose sensitive data through carelessness or a lack of security awareness training. That is the first category of insider threats. Secondly, malicious insiders, who include, again, your current as well as your former employees, contractors, or business partners who have authorized access and then intentionally abuse it. Now, while their behavior patterns may seem normal from an internal IT team's perspective, their intentions are not, and the outcome may be data loss or disclosure. Thirdly, they are the imposters, as in the outside threat actors that have stolen the credentials of an authorized user and then leverage that user's credentials and then access for their own purposes. And the outcome is usually a behavior pattern in which the privileges are escalated and critical data is either exfiltrated or disclosed to the public. Now, how much do these insider attacks cost your organization? Another findings from the same study is that many security teams may not recognize the financial impact insider attacks can have on an organization, even though it's difficult to identify the true cost of a major security incident. The most common estimate that is given by the organizations who participated in this survey is that it's around $100,000 per successful insider attack. And in addition to the monetary loss, there are forensic issues that you have to deal with to discover how the incident happened. And this also requires significant time from your own internal security team to remediate the incident. You must also conduct additional training, potentially hire outside consultants, and even replace the equipment to close any loopholes. And besides the monetary loss and all of this that I just listed, there is the operational disruption, the loss of critical data, and also the brand damage to account for. So, from here on, let's look at some of the top five mistakes or pitfalls in active directory management that are too costly to ignore. And then I'll also talk about some of the best practices or workarounds to address those issues. And then finally, at the end of the session, I'll just give a quick brief introduction to one of the solutions in AD ManageEngine suite, which is going to help you address this. So again, I will not be spending too much time on that. We do have dedicated workshop sessions, which will give you a very in-depth breakdown of all the solutions, all the features within the solution. And you can always sign up for that if you're interested in a product demo. So moving forward, the first point that I would like to address is granting excessive privileges to users, right, or groups, or generally your employees. So when the employees join the organization as a part of their onboarding, you as IT administrators or as the IT security team as a whole give them a gamut of permissions which are necessary for these users to carry out their function or their day-to-day tasks. So over time, maybe they joined as interns, they get converted to a full-time employee, then they get promoted, or there's a lateral move within the organization itself. These roles and responsibilities keeps changing for users within their life cycle of within the organization. So in such circumstances, one way to keep the permissions simple when you're granting them is to give full control to every user, but that would be a recipe for disaster. So any user receiving more permissions than they need, like permissions to view, modify, or even delete sensitive files, can lead to data loss, breaches, incorrect modifications. Now, rather than giving full permissions to each user, a recommended best practice is employing a principle of least privilege. That is, you grant only the minimal amount of privileges that each user needs to complete their work. And to further reduce the risk, as in when you are granting privileges to users, it's always a good practice to review their existing privileges. Or, in fact, you can set up um, a periodic review wherein you take stock of all the users and groups in your organization, who has access to what, which group they are part of, which file servers they have access to what level they have access to, and so on. And once you do an audit of all these permissions on a periodic basis, on a regular basis, then you can identify any excessive privileges that the users may have accumulated over time, right? So that is one way to control excessive privileges. Secondly, even when you're granting privileges, let's say if you're giving them least privilege that is necessary for them to carry out their role, if there is an opportunity for you to give them privileges for a limited time, right? Especially when you are giving privileges to interns or employees who are going to be with you for a short period, like your contractors, or even someone who needs access to data for auditing purpose, right? So when you're giving privileges, make sure you give a time limit so you don't have to go back to those privileges at a later point in time and then revoke them. Again, it's not a practical solution, or it's not an easy um, option to go back to those privileges and then revoke them after a certain point in time, because we simply tend to forget these tasks because we already have an overwhelming number of tickets that are raised as a part of our day-to-day administrative duties. So again, when you're configuring just-in-time access, as in temporary permissions that you're giving to the users, that will save you a lot of time, and also will make sure that the permissions are not misused at a later point in time. So these are some of the ways in which you can curb or control the users having permissions that are not necessary or more than necessary for their role or their function. Another important point, or something that we tend to overlook, is addressing the stale accounts. So again, I'm not restricted to just users, users who've left the organization, but also your other objects like your computers that have not been, that have been inactive for a long time, groups, security groups without any members. So all of these are stale accounts, and all of them are potential security loopholes, right? For example, when an employee leaves an organization, if in an ideal environment, if the HR is notifying the administrative team, IT administrative team, with the notification from from the employees manager or from the HR stating that these set of users have left the organization, and you take care of their accounts, you deprovision them right away, then it's great. But owing to many number of reasons, either you're not notified in time, or even if you're notified, you do not have the time or resources to address those stale accounts, because you have a lot of tickets that are coming your way as part of your active employees, right? Your employees who are present in the organization, which has more priority than cleaning up of stale accounts. Also, the idea of embarking on this task of cleaning up your active directory can be overwhelming because of the sheer number of stale accounts that could be in your organization. Again, that depends on the size of your organization or how often you've been performing a cleanup or purging of these stale accounts. So again, another measure, or one way to reduce the time and the effort for this, is scheduling and automation, wherein you let the tool, if you have a third party solution which communicates with your Active Directory, what you can do is enforce an automated cleanup of these stale accounts. Or very similar to the point that we discussed in the earlier slide, where you do a periodic review with your permissions. Similarly, you do a periodic review of your employees, your ex-employees, and making sure that the accounts of those ex-employees are deprovisioned in the right way. And when I say in the right way, making sure that all their privileges that are linked to those accounts are removed. So the groups that they are part of, their file server permissions that they had access to, they still have access to at this point, are removed. So even if those accounts are compromised at some point, let's say by a malicious insider or even by an external hacker, and they do get access to these accounts, they cannot do as much as damage as they hope to, because again, these are just going to be dummy accounts without much privileges that they had when they were part of the organization. So another loophole that can be closed, that can be plugged, if you do a routine cleanup and then of these stale accounts, your dormant accounts, not just users, but also your computers and groups. So if you use the delegation, built-in delegation control wizard in Active Directory, it's not the most user-friendly way in which you can delegate your permissions. First up, even if you have to give certain privileges, again, tracking them is difficult because you can do it manually. You may have given maybe an entire action to the, like for example, password reset or account unlock to the entire help desk and just left it at that, because more granular delegation is just simply not feasible. It's clunky. Or sometimes you may have given privileges to users and might have regretted it because they were misused, And then delegation is something that you're not too fond of, because you might have done some damage control to, in case if there were any misuse of privileges. So again, when you're giving privileges, making sure that you enforce certain administrative boundaries. For example, you have a set of users as a part of your IT security team, or even your non-admin users like the HR or a manager of a team who needs to or who could have access to these things. So you can take some time or tasks off your list, so you can unburden them in certain way. But even when you're granting permissions to other users, making sure that a set of user who's going to take care of your password reset and account unlock and all those help desk requests that comes your way has access only to that. Similarly, if you have a user who's going to help you with your provisioning or is going to address only the user provisioning request, then they have privileges only for that particular action. So making sure that you define what they can do and what they cannot do is one way to control any unauthorized access or misuse of privileges, right? So you've done your due diligence, which is giving or making sure that everyone has the permission that they need and nothing more. But it's also very important to keep track of what they did over a period of time. So you want to audit their actions, making sure that just to ensure that everything is in place. And it also helps to have an audit trail of all these activities done by these users apart from you. And this will also help in your compliance audits. So moving on, delegation is something that maybe you're not too fond of. Instead, you want the users themselves to reach out to you for any changes or for any privileges that they need. Then you can always enforce a certain validation for these requests. Meaning, when the user is raising a request, rather than it getting addressed to you directly, and you not knowing the context of the request, is this valid, is this request valid, does the user need access to this, so and so. Instead, it goes through a channel where it is validated by multiple users. By validation, I mean whether it could be the user's manager, the employee's manager, who can review the request and then approve it or reject it based on the nature of the request. And then only if it passes through all these channels and it's approved in all these stages, then it will come to you for execution, right? So that way, there is an audit trail and there is a record of all the requests that has been raised, who approved it, who carried out the task, as in who executed the task or who gave privileges, the timestamp, all of that will be maintained, so that that will again help you with your audits. And also another way to incorporate or making sure that these actions are addressed immediately is to also notify through alerts. So that is again closely linked to the point that I've listed here at the end. Making sure that you can configure real-time alerts, both SMS or email, whichever is convenient for based on your organization's policy. So that user or that employee or the manager gets notified immediately that there is a request and that has been addressed to you. Similarly, you also can get notified immediately if there is any pressing need, right? So that is another way to keep track of all the changes in real time. And if there is any request which is of malicious nature and that has been raised by a user, you can immediately flag that down and reject it in this channel itself, right? So that will control any unauthorized changes, but also help you to keep track of every action and whoever has approved it, whoever has rejected it, or whoever has executed the action, there is an accountability for each of it. And a very important point, but something that we take it too lightly, are the data entry errors, right? So if you have a very, in an organization, maybe the HR is sending you all the details immediately. Let's say if a set of users are set to join the organization on a Monday, and if you're going to get the result, an email from the HR on a Friday evening saying you'll have to provision these accounts for our new employees, you are tasked with creating accounts for these users right away, because when the users join the organization on a Monday, right, they should have all the access they need. It cannot be made to wait. It's not exactly the most the best solution that we have. But again, unfortunately, if we are in an organization, if it's a big organization, if you're a a small member team, or if you're the only person who's managing all the employees' help desk requests, that is not a solution or a situation that we want to be in, right? So when you're addressing all these changes, could be user provisioning requests that comes your way, or even modifications like employees being transferred to one department to another, or any changes to employees attributes that need to be done. Doing it manually is not easy, and if you're doing it for multiple users at the same time, then there are chances for errors to creep in. There are chances for inconsistencies if you are a multi-member team and each of you have your own way to approach a ticket or a request. Then there could be inconsistencies, right? And by inconsistencies, it means user can have incorrect access. Maybe the data was not entered right. So that way, that can also be misused if if there are any privileges that they should not have been granted to them. That is also another loophole that needs to be addressed. So one way to control or to address these inconsistencies is having a checklist of permissions. Maybe if you know that a set of users, 5 employees are new hires are going to join the organization to the finance department, and if you have a checklist for all the permissions or all the attributes that these finance department employees should have, if you have a common checklist which all of you in your organization use, or in your location, in your geographical office use, then that's perfect. That way you can avoid any changes or any inconsistencies when these employees are being onboarded. And even when there are changes, when there are department level changes, right, users being promoted from one role to another, from one department to another, having a checklist or a reference will help you address these data entry errors. So these are some of the points that I thought will be closely linked to insider threats and what we can do as from our end to prevent that. So again, I have not gone in depth with this, and because I'm also again just giving a very brief introduction to AD Manager Plus. This tool itself has a lot of capabilities with respect to Active Directory management, reporting, delegation, automation, workflow, backup, and recovery. It's a beast in itself. I'm not going in depth with all the solutions because, as I said in the beginning, that is for our workshop sessions or product demo sessions. But I have listed few points here which are closely linked to the 5 points that I've listed earlier, right, that we discussed earlier. So starting off with addressing the last point that we discussed is our data entry errors, that is integration with HRMS solutions. So the tool offers integration with HRMS solutions and databases wherein you can automate your employee lifecycle management activities. So again, not just your user onboarding, but your user reprovisioning, right? Those departmental changes, lateral moves, promotions, transfers, so on and so forth. All of that can be synced to your Active Directory with these HRMS integrations. For example, as and when the HR is updating the details, right, in the HR portal, all those changes will be fetched and then correspondingly it will be changed in Active Directory side of the application, and also other business platforms that you might be using, M365, Exchange details, and so on, right? Similarly, when you're having a checklist of permissions, right? So the equivalent of that is templates in AD Manager Plus, where you can create any number of templates that you want for any roles. So it could be the finance department, marketing, HR. You can create templates wherein you configure all the attributes of the users that are relevant to their role or their designation or their function, and you save it. So you can create any number of templates you want. You basically fetch those templates when you're creating users, any number of users, right? 10, 50 users, you can reuse those templates anytime you want. And that will simplify the time that you normally would put aside to create users, right? So that will save you the time as well as address, so prevent any errors that could creep in when you are doing all these actions manually. Another point, which is again linked to the first topic, which was reviewing all the permissions of the existing users and groups. knowing what are the assets in your organization and who has access to them, to what level do they have access to, and so on. So having a review through with the help of a report, and AD Manager Plus offers more than 200 reports, and then there are reports which are specific to your security aspect, like your permissions, your nested group memberships, file server permissions, and so on. And these reports can be exported in multiple formats. They can be scheduled to be sent to your inbox. So all of that can be addressed from a comprehensive report library. There is no need to write any scripts. They are all just, you click the name of the report, you get the report as it is, right? Up to date information. So that's how these reports can help you address any uh, privilege creep within your organization, especially when you're preparing for your audits. These reports come in handy. And another point, which is linked to the topic that I was talking about earlier about workflow, wherein you can have multiple checkpoints or validation stages before the request is sent to the executor. So you can create a customizable workflow which can be based on the nature of the request. You can tweak it, and then you can add who is going to approve the request, who's going to create who has access to create a request, and who can finally execute it, whether it's you as IT administrator or whether it's the technicians who's going to address it. So that can be that can be completely customized based on your needs and your organization policies. And last point, which is again important, is configuring alerts, making sure that whatever change that may be happening, everyone is notified, all the stakeholders are aware of. If the change or if that request is of malicious nature, they can be immediately identified and addressed. So these are some of the points that, again, I thought would help with the points that we discussed. But if you are curious to know more about AD Manager Plus, and if you would like one of our technical experts, my team, to get in touch with you to give you a free online demo of the solution, or if you have any specific concerns and you want to know if the solution will help you address that, then what I do right now is I launch a poll on the screen. So this is just for my understanding. If you're already a customer of AD Manager Plus, if you're evaluating the solution, and if you are evaluating, if you need one of our team members to get in touch with you for a free online demo, then you can please make use of this poll and let me know. So once I get the results, I will share this with my team. I'll be able to see the entries live as well. So I see that some of you have filled in yes for the second option. So I'm just going to leave this on the screen for another 10-15 seconds. And based on your responses, I will let my team know and they will get in touch with you at your convenient date and time. Great. Thank you so much for your responses. I'm just going to quickly end the poll. So if there are any last minute entries, any changes, to let me know. Great. Thank you. Lovely. So I'm going to launch another feedback because we've reached the end of the session. Just like the previous feedback, I'd be able to see this live. So do let me know what you thought about today's session. So I'm just going to again leave this on the screen for another minute. And at the end, I will also share my email address. So you can mail me if you have any questions you have about the session, about the product. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm just going to quickly um, end the poll in another 10-15 seconds or so. And if you do have any questions, I'll be here online. So you can chat with me after the session ends as well. Great. Thank you so much for your responses. I really appreciate your feedback. With that, we have reached the end of the session. As I said, um, if you have any questions, I'll be here. You can chat with me. So, rest of the attendees who have joined me for today's session, thank you so much, and I hope to see you all for our next session. And until then, please do take care and have a lovely day.